The sound didn't register at first, a dull thud like a bag of sand hitting the ground. Then came the scream. When I turned toward the porch, my heart stopped. My wife, Grace, 5 months pregnant, was sprawled at the bottom of the stairs, one hand clutching her belly, the other reaching weakly for me. And at the top of those same stairs stood the man who pushed her, a smug, khaki-clad HOA compliance officer named Brian Keller. His mirrored sunglasses hid his eyes, but the satisfied curl of his mouth told me everything. He'd actually kicked my pregnant wife off our porch over Christmas lights. The grocery bags slipped from my hands. Oranges rolled down the driveway. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears louder than his voice as he shouted, "I told you those lights weren't authorized!" Community Code 14B. That was the moment something in me went cold. Not angry, not scared, just precise. Years of military training kicked in like muscle memory. My wife was hurt, and the man responsible was standing 10 feet away pretending to enforce community law. Before we dive in, comment which country you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels. Let me rewind. 2 weeks earlier, the HOA board had hired what they call the Compliance Division. Basically, a bunch of retirees and wannabe cops who patrolled the neighborhood with clipboards and cheap badges. Keller was their ringleader. He'd been bragging about tightening community standards, which was HOA code for harassing people who didn't look or live like him. Grace had always loved Christmas. It was her way of brightening dark days. And since we were expecting, she wanted to hang lights early, just a few white strands along the porch. Nothing fancy. Keller showed up the next morning, snapping photos and citing decor violations. I told him politely he was mistaken. The HOA's own bylaws stated decorations were allowed after November 15th. He sneered, said the rule changed last quarter, and handed me a fake citation printed on cheap paper. I didn't argue. I'd seen men like him before. Authority junkies who crumble the second someone stands up to them. Still, Grace took it to heart. "Maybe we should take them down," she said. "I don't want trouble." "Trouble finds itself," I told her. "You did nothing wrong." For days, Keller circled the block like a vulture. Parked outside, snapped pictures, left notes, taped the mailbox. Non-compliant lighting will result in fines and enforcement. I kept each one time-stamped and photographed. Old habits die hard. Evidence is everything. Then this afternoon, I'd gone out to get groceries. When I pulled back into the driveway, the first thing I saw was Keller's car in front of our house. His engine was still running. The second thing was Grace on the porch, standing firm, refusing to let him inside. By the time I made it halfway up the walkway, that's when it happened. The shove, the scream, and my whole world tilted on its axis. I rushed him and beat him before he could finish a single excuse. He never saw it coming. Not the shove, not the speed. Years of training turned into instinct. A hard shove to break his balance. A palm to the jaw that snapped his head back. 2 quick elbows to the ribs when he tried to scramble for his clipboard. Neighbors gasped. A kid dropped his phone. Keller flailed, more surprised than hurt, and kept babbling about bylaws and fines while I closed the distance. I didn't go for glory. I went to stop him from doing more damage. I drove my shoulder into his chest, twisted him off the top step, and sent him sprawling onto the concrete. He tried to get up, hand fumbling for the pocket where he kept that fake badge. I stomped beside his head and pinned his shoulder with my boot hard enough to make him hiss. "Don't move," I said, voice flat. "You hit my wife." He tried to sputter something about enforcement. I shut it down with a firm palm to the side of his face. It wasn't pretty, but it was controlled. When he reached again, I trapped his wrist, twisted, and wrenched him face down, cuffing his hands behind him with the strap from his clipboard. He choked out, "Call the police then." As if that would somehow save him. A neighbor finally called 911. The dispatcher's calm voice cut through the chaos. Help is on the way. Stay with your wife. Don't let anyone interfere. Then came another sound. Not sirens, but a deep diesel growl rolling through the neighborhood. For a moment, I thought it was the ambulance, but the tone was heavier. Headlights swung around the corner. 2 military convoy vehicles moving in formation. They stopped right in front of my house, and the sight froze everyone. A tall figure stepped down from the lead truck. General Samuel Briggs, my former commanding officer. His presence alone silenced the street. He took one look at Grace on the ground, me crouched beside her, and Keller pinned underfoot, and didn't need to ask questions. Connell, he said, voice steady but concerned. She's stable. Our medics will hold until the ambulance arrives. Within seconds, uniformed medics were kneeling beside Grace, checking vitals with calm precision. Their professionalism steadied my breathing. Grace's voice trembled, but stayed strong. The baby's still moving, she whispered. Keller's swagger was gone. The man who'd shoved the pregnant woman now sat in the dirt, shaking his fake badge dangling from his vest. When local deputies arrived minutes later, everything was on camera. My doorbell feed, neighbors' phones, even the convoy dash cam. There was no debate. He was guilty of assault and impersonating an officer. As the deputies read him his rights, Grace was lifted into the ambulance. She reached for my hand and managed a small smile. You look like you just clocked in, she said. I did, I answered. This is what I was trained for. Neighbors began stepping out from behind curtains, filming, whispering, realizing the HOA cop weren't real at all. Keller's team stood frozen, afraid to move. Their fake authority had just collapsed under the weight of real law. If you're enjoying this HOA story so far, like and subscribe because the story is only going to get better. The morning after the attack felt like another world. The street was quiet, but the headlines weren't. Local news vans lined the block by noon. Fake HOA cop assaults pregnant woman plastered across every screen. The footage was everywhere. Keller shoved, my takedown, the convoy's arrival, even the general stepping out. The county sheriff's department didn't waste time. Keller was booked under 3 state statutes: assault, battery on a pregnant woman, and impersonating a peace officer. His fake badge and uniform were logged as evidence. The HOA office was sealed that same afternoon for investigation. Grace was discharged 2 days later, bruised but safe. The baby was fine. When the nurse placed her discharge papers in my hand, she smiled faintly. You got half the city cheering for you, she said. I smiled back, but all I could think about was justice. During the arraignment, Keller tried to claim he acted under HOA authority. The judge nearly laughed. There is no provision in any HOA charter granting use of force or enforcement through intimidation, she said sharply. You are a private citizen and a violent one at that. The general's testimony sealed it. He described Keller's actions as reckless endangerment of a civilian family under color of authority. The court nodded. Those words carried weight. The HOA board tried to distance themselves, but county auditors found records linking them directly to Keller's fake compliance division. They had hired him as an independent contractor to maintain order. What that meant in practice was paying a bully to harass residents. By the end of the week, Keller pleaded guilty. Sentence: 3 years in state prison, mandatory anger management, and restitution to my family for medical and property damages. The HOA's board members weren't spared either. Each faced civil penalties for violating residents' rights through intimidation. The HOA was dissolved pending reorganization, and its assets seized until claims were settled. Grace and I returned home to find flowers on the porch from nearly every neighbor. Some who had once stayed silent now came forward with stories of harassment, threats, bogus citations, even property damage. Together, we formed a new neighborhood committee, legitimate and transparent, with law enforcement oversight. Weeks later, the general stopped by one evening, standing beside my repaired porch. "You handled yourself like a soldier," he said quietly. "I looked out over the calm street where kids were playing again, and lights glowed from porches without fear." "Just did what I had to," I said. This time, home was the battlefield. He nodded once. "And you won it." I watched him drive off, headlights disappearing into the dusk, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the neighborhood breathe easy again. What do you think, folks? Should that fake HOA ever be allowed to reform after what they did? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one.